Founder fans, Jason here, and today's founder is Jemima Warner, a woman who apparently traveled with Benedict Arnold's army and was involved in the invasion of Canada. Now, I'll be honest, I had never actually heard of Jemima Warner until just 2 days ago when I was reached out to by who else? Let's welcome back Michael Troy from the American Revolution podcast. Michael, thank you for coming back.
Hi, Jason. Happy to be here.
Well, as I was saying, I knew very little about Jemima Warner and almost nothing, and you specifically contacted me to talk about her. So, what about Jemima Warner is interesting?
Yeah, she's really one of my favorite people because she is so unknown, and I think she really is deserving of more attention. Jemima Warner, at the beginning of the war, was a young teenage girl. She got married. She was married by 17. We don't actually know when she got married, so she may have been married even younger than that, to a man named James Warner. James Warner and Jemima lived in Pennsylvania. They believe Lancaster County. In 1775, when the war began, James Warner became a part of Thompson's Rifles, which was a famous regiment. There were only a handful of regiments outside of New England that went up to join Washington's army shortly after Washington took command of the brand new Continental Army. A few of the regiments were from Virginia and a few were from Pennsylvania. So James Warner was from one of the Pennsylvania regiments, and they went up to Boston to participate in the siege.
And so Jemima joined her husband as a camp follower when he joined George Washington?
Exactly. Jemima followed her husband to New England and was at the siege. A lot of people don't appreciate the fact that armies were family events at the time. There were quite a few women and children who followed their husbands and fathers around in the army and helped take care of them and did a lot of cooking and sewing and other things that were desperately needed by the army.
So her husband ends up joining Benedict Arnold, I understand.
Yeah, sieges tend to be boring. You're sitting around a lot, not doing much of anything. The rifle regiments were actually the rock stars when they first got up there. People were really impressed that they could shoot someone at more than 100 yards away and all this stuff. They really showed off their prowess. But they were sitting there for months and months and months without much happening. Benedict Arnold had the great idea of wanting to do something. Up north, General Philip Schuyler and Richard Montgomery were trying to move against Quebec from upstate New York and running into a lot of opposition. Benedict Arnold had the idea of, well, let's take a bunch of troops up to Maine, march across the wilderness, and attack Quebec from the other side, and just bring a force coming down on Quebec while Schuyler and Montgomery are marching up toward Quebec, and will capture the British in a pincer movement, essentially.
Right. And
so
that famously went awry. If I'm not mistaken, that's when they were forced to eat Henry Dearborn's dogs.
Yeah, the maps that they had of Maine, or it was considered part of Massachusetts at the time, but we know the area as Maine, was completely unpopulated except by native tribes. And no white people had even really been through that area. There were a handful of maps that had been made by British soldiers of the area, and a common British tactic at the time was to release maps that were deliberately inaccurate for just this sort of thing, to throw off people who shouldn't know how to get through certain areas. So they thought they had a much shorter and flatter distance to traverse than they really did. So Benedict Arnold took about 1,100 men up through the Maine wilderness. They got stuck in the woods. I think he started in late September, so it was October, November. It was starting to get really cold and miserable. There was no food to eat. The men started starving to death. They also ended up drinking some water that they shouldn't have and got some really horrible diarrhea. And just, you can imagine having to march for days having that
Yeah.
kind of condition. It's
It
not
sounds
fun.
like a lot of fun. So tell us, Jemima Warner actually follows this fairly small army through the Maine wilderness. How does she and her husband fare particularly?
Yeah, as I said, John Warner was, or I'm sorry, James Warner was a rifleman, and he joined a division that was marching under Arnold's overall leadership, but he was under um, then I'm going to flake on his name now.
Oh, that's all right. I can't remember it either. There are so many
No,
founders to
it's a
remember.
very famous person, which is killing
Yeah,
me here.
I know.
Um,
See, I keep running through the lower
who's the,
levels
who's
because
the
on
famous?
this trip was, like I said, Henry Dearborn and Aaron Burr were all a part of this trip. So there's a lot of people who
Who's
would
the
be
most
famous.
famous commander? Who's the most famous commander of all riflemen?
Oh, Daniel Morgan.
Thank you,
Nailed
Colonel
it.
Daniel Morgan.
Nailed it. So either
He
way.
was under Colonel Daniel Morgan. Daniel Morgan had a special regiment of riflemen made up of both Pennsylvania and Virginia riflemen who marched with this. So anyway, they went all into the wilderness. Jemima went with her husband. They got sick and hungry and miserable, and a third of Arnold's team actually turned around and deserted him without orders and went back to Massachusetts saying, "This is too hard, we can't do it." Benedict Arnold later tried to have them court-martialed, and the court acquitted them because they said this march was too miserable. You couldn't expect men to make this march. It was horrible.
See, that's the name I'm flaking on. The commander, the colonel who turned those men around. It really bothered me. I can't remember his name because he ends up being exonerated and helps found the nation. Although he is kind of a random person. So as for Jemima, I understand her husband was wounded or he fell ill.
Her husband got sick during the march, and he died.
Great.
In the middle of the march, in the middle of the wilderness, dead. So.
But she tried to nurse him back to health.
He got sick and could not keep up with the army. The army did not have a motto of no man left behind at that point, so they left him behind to die in the woods by himself. Jemima decided to stay with her husband and do what she could for him. She couldn't do anything, and he died.
So she's left alone in the woods.
17-year-old Jemima Warner was alone in the middle of the wilderness with no one and nothing. She managed to catch up with the army and continue on with them to Quebec. So after about a little over between 2 and 3 months, they make it finally to Quebec. They're starving, they're in tatters. As you said, they ate their dogs along the way, and that wasn't even enough. It was a really horrible situation. They got into the outskirts of Quebec, found some farmers, and essentially took and devoured all their cattle because they were just that hungry.
Not uncommon during the Revolutionary War.
Yeah. So anyway, so Jemima Warner is now without her husband, just kind of following the army along and doing what she can for the cause. Arnold reaches Quebec before Schuyler and Montgomery do, so he's there with only a few hundred men, but on the other hand, there was almost no one there to defend Quebec either. So he thinks he can get General Carleton to surrender the city to him. And so he sends out a messenger under a flag of truce, and General Carleton's soldiers shoot at the messenger under a flag of truce.
Great.
So Arnold's not quite sure how to deliver his message. Jemima Warner says, well, hey, they're not going to shoot at a woman. So she takes the message, marches up to the city gates, and delivers it to General Carleton. General Carleton tears up the paper because these are a bunch of rebels who are not recognized as legitimate enemy. They're criminals. And he throws Warner into prison.
Great.
Yeah, so
is she
after
held
a couple,
for a long time?
No, only a few days, and he ends up sending her back to the enemy lines again. There, Jemima Warner is very conspicuous in bringing water and ammunition to the troops on the front line, putting herself in great danger, showing amazing amount of bravery. This young woman, after all she's already been through, and continuing to do everything she can for the cause, she is rewarded by receiving a ball of grape shot in the head and is killed instantly. And that, unfortunately, is the end of Jemima Warner. But she's just always impressed me because she did such an amazing thing and really gave everything and overcame so many hardships to do what she did for the cause. And she's just completely unremembered.
Yeah, that's an amazing story. Like I said, I mean, I spent how many years looking up random founders every single day, and I've never even heard of her. But that is a tremendous story. It ends with kind of a bummer, but it's a tremendous story. Michael, thank you so much for coming and sharing with us the story of Jemima Warner.
Absolutely, my pleasure.
Founder fans, thank you again for watching. Again, Jemima Warner, there it is. Michael Troy, if you enjoyed this, you will love the American Revolution podcast. There's a link in the description below, as well as to his Twitter handle. Make sure you like and subscribe this video. I'm doing interviews now all the time with lots of amazing people involved in studying the American Revolution. Hi, TJ. I see you there. Hi, everyone else. Thank you again. And I will be back with another founder for you. Actually, no, tomorrow's Friday. I will be back with trivia for you tomorrow.